Hello, my name is Jami Milne, and I'm the creative director for Ballet Des Moines. And I want to thank you all so much for spending your evening with us. This certainly isn't a live stage, which we wish we could have you at and be enjoying your company with, but we will make do like everyone else. I am honored to be here tonight with Ryan Jolicoeur-Nye. I am so happy that we were able to steal from his time. He spent the fall with us as he created a little Levity, which you just saw. And we have a few questions from him. Of course, if you have questions, don't hesitate to share them with us in the chat box and we'll get them asked. But first, Ryan, would you share a little bit about yourself for the audience?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This is such a wonderful event, collaboration, act of resilience. It's really, really amazing. So I am currently the ballet master for Oklahoma City Ballet. I was a dancer for 15 years. I retired at the Kansas City Ballet, where I honed my craft as a choreographer and moved into managing their second company. And I most recently took over as artistic director for Northwest Arkansas Ballet Theater before I came to Oklahoma City. And that was really a wonderful experience. I got a lot of opportunity to choreograph and create and be innovative. And here I am now in Oklahoma City and doing it like everyone else.
Doing it well. Thank you. I wanted to talk to you first and foremost about this beautiful, lighthearted ballet. I will never forget when I walked into the Ballet Des Moines studio, which is located in West Des Moines this fall. I heard Mozart playing, and it was, I believe, from the second act. So it was deep and dark, and one of my favorite moody classical songs. And I walked into the studio, and there was nothing moody or dark happening from the dancers. In fact, I think there was a bucket for someone to potentially pretend to throw up in. Can you share with us some of your thought process in terms of turning a very thought of as perhaps a very classical art form into something a little lighthearted?
Well, like everyone in the world right now, I spent most of my time trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. And it seemed to be a blow after blow experience. And we all were sort of just trying to find a way to be successful and succeed. And I was in a meeting that was partially on Zoom, partially in person. And somebody in the meeting said the word levity. And I immediately stopped paying attention to what was happening in the meeting and just thought about that word for a few minutes and realized that's really what we all need, is just a little bit of levity. So when Serkan asked me to come and create a piece, my wheelhouse, my comfort zone, especially in such a short time frame, is not comedy at all. In fact, I've never done comedy. But I thought it seemed rather appropriate for the time. And it was challenging for me as an artist because it's something I've never done. I have danced comedy frequently and know that it is incredibly challenging to create comedy. And so I wanted to rise to that challenge and also, I guess, bring a little levity to the world.
You got it in there, so good job. Can you tell me, one of the things you had mentioned in one of the earlier behind the scenes questions that Iowa PBS had for you during interview days was whether or not so there are inside jokes clearly to the ballet world within this production. Did you have any concerns about how those might translate to someone that's new to the ballet and watching what was unfolding on stage?
Well, I think generally speaking, I was concerned about the whole thing. it's scary doing comedy because if nobody laughs, then you fail. And that is a very vulnerable thing. Actually, in choreography, in anything I've created, I have never felt vulnerable really before because it's so objective, it's so open to interpretation. Comedy really isn't. You kind of have to hit the nail or not. Um, but I wasn't particularly worried about the ballet jokes because all of the jokes that represent sort of the inner circle of the dance world are just funny anyway. Uh, for example, there's this really weird thing that every prince in every classical ballet does is he searches around the stage with this morose look on his face, pretending that he can't see the things that are right in front of him. And it creates this, I don't know, illusion that somehow he's lost or he can't find the thing he's looking for. But really, I mean, the audience can see clearly that when he swipes, across the thing and he misses the princess, it's very obvious. So things like that are just, I think, generally funny. If you have no background in ballet, you might also laugh because they're a bit odd.
Understood. Lots of laughter. Our audience is muted, but I have no doubt there is roaring laughter. So rest assured, everyone is finding it funny. There was a question that came from the audience, and I want to morph it a little bit, but someone asked, as an incredibly accomplished choreographer, do you enjoy working with small companies like Ballet Des Moines? And I would love if you would expand on that slightly and share how it was different working with Ballet Des Moines this year during a pandemic.
So that is a full question. The first of all, I almost, it's comparing apples and oranges. Working with a large company with huge production value, you get a huge selection of dancers and this enormous production team and these finances and your vision inevitably isn't your own, and it comes out to be something so much greater than what you anticipated, and that is all wonderful. The beauty of working with a small company is that you really, really get to know people. Um, you get to know the people within the organization, not just the dancers. You get to understand the mission of the organization, um, and with fewer dancers, um, sometimes you're forced to use them all, and and that as a choreographer is really interesting for me because my job is not necessarily to make myself look good. My job is to uh, say something, create something that will move an audience in one way or another, but to create something that is so specific to these dancers that doing it somewhere else wouldn't really be a reality. I personally don't like repeating ballets elsewhere. I think you have an individual dancer that is unique to the world. The amazing thing about artists is there will never, ever, ever be a duplicate of the artist, and that's kind of amazing. And so I like the amount of time that I get to spend and the how much I get to like look into who the dancers are as artists, and yeah, it's really wonderful.
One of the questions that was asked, if you could spend a little time talking about this, perhaps specifically as it pertains to a little levity. The question was, do you wait until you watch a group of dancers before deciding how or what to choreograph?
I I think I take a unique approach. I plan zero before I walk in the studio. I used to do the opposite. I would write every step, every second, every count, everything was spoken for in a notebook. And the dancers in my head would do this really beautifully. And then I would get in the studio and I would stumble over what it was I was trying to get across. I would read my words and remember what I was thinking, or try to remember what I was thinking. And it ended up being contrived and not collaborative and um, not my best work. And as I honed my voice and spent more time creating work, I realized that my best approach, or the approach that I love the most, is when I can go into the studio. Sometimes I don't even pick the music until I get in the studio and I sit there with the dancers and listen to things and find something that sparks something in someone in the room, me or the dancers, or and then we just start to create from scratch. And if I get a beginning in maybe where they start out on the stage or a subject matter, and I just move from there. Um, so yeah, my approach is I think unique in that I prefer not to prepare at all, even if I don't know the dancers.
That leads into another question that someone asked, and that is, how did you choose this music for Little Levity?
Well, I always wanted to use Mozart. I will likely use Mozart again in a more serious manner, but every time I open Lacrimosa and try to listen to it, uh, I think there's no way that I could do that justice. It's so heavy and grand and beautiful, and how could I make something that lives up to that? Um, so I went the opposite direction and juxtaposed Lacrimosa. Um, but yeah, I was listening through music and I felt inspired by Mozart. I heard uh, the first piece and thought, there's comedy in that first piece of music. There's zero comedy in Lacrimosa, so I have to find something in that. Um, and there are little jokes in that nobody will probably ever get, that were just for me. And the last piece is definitely a closer. It's bright and exciting and funny also. So I think it's all suited for comedy.
Well, on that note, we're going to end with being bright and funny and well suited. And we want to thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us, not only this season, but for this evening as well. And I certainly hope we get to welcome you back to Des Moines soon.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying with us this evening, seeing the second performance in Active Resilience Vision. We're so glad you're here with us tonight. And also joining us live from Noche, Mr. Max Wellman. Thank you for being here with the ballet.
Of course, it's my pleasure. It was my pleasure to be a part of the project and to be doing this here tonight.
I would love for those audience members who are not perhaps from Des Moines or maybe even Iowa, would you share a little bit about yourself, Max?
Sure. I am a native of Des Moines, Iowa, and bounced around to several other cities before coming back here about 6 years ago. And shortly thereafter, was one of the co-founders for Noche here, a jazz and cabaret club down by the Sculpture Park in downtown Des Moines. But I still, I perform, I guess, around the region and sometimes still around the country, although not very much these days.
Around the country right now is through Iowa PBS. So thank you. To be able to share these globally is really exciting for us as well. I was trying to think, of course, I feel as though I know you from, Martini Night at the Lift, but can you share years ago, can you share with us if you remember your first introduction to Ballet Des Moines?
Yes. Well, ballet in general, of course, I grew up around many other kinds of performers after I started singing from a young age. And there were friends of mine who were involved in the initial, I think it was early years for Des Moines Ballet. I myself did not possess the talent. But always had such a high level of respect for dancers and for the company. And that only grew. I went to school at Butler University in Indianapolis, which has a really stellar ballet program. And I lived with some dancers, God help us all. Um, and I've always kind of had a healthy respect kind of from the periphery for dancers. But I will say this was my first time working with dancers in this capacity. I used to do a lot of work in theater, and so there was a different kind of dancer you'd run into in that world. Often people with ballet training, but
Sure.
yeah, and I'm sure you'll remember this room that I'm in right now. Actually, was where we had the first collaborative event between myself and Des Moines Ballet, and it was just such a wonderful time from the get-go that we just kind of kept going ever since.
Can you share with us, and a reminder to those watching at home, if you do have questions for Max, please plop those into the chat and we'll make sure those are asked this evening. But I wanted to ask, particularly in thinking about producing work with ballerinas, with a band, with an artistic director, and of course yourself, a main stage artist as well. Can you talk a little bit about that process or the complexity that occurs on stage?
Sure. I think that the thing that comes back to me over and over again when I think about it, and as we're experiencing it, whether in rehearsal or in performance, is just the extra energy that is added to everything that everyone is doing when there are so many artists on stage and doing this through different mediums. I think there's this kind of cohesion that happens where we all know we have similar sensibilities about the music, but we're coming from it in such from different perspectives, and to see that come together is really kind of a high. And I will say again, like I've said before, all of the people involved with Des Moines Ballet, from the top down, have just always been a pleasure to work with. So that is not necessarily always the case, as anyone in the arts community knows. And when it does happen, it's you remember how much you love the work. Everyone's happy to be there.
Do you feel any sense of distractions? Clearly, I am trying to remember being at the studio at Iowa PBS, how many musicians were on stage, but even thinking through the tempo of the music, but then the distraction of the dancers in point and the sounds. Can you maybe speak to what that's like?
Sure, it is very different for sure from a normal performance. And I often felt like a kind of mediator between the band and the company, because it might be, for instance, Tina would never do "Girl from Ipanema" at that tempo, and she's one of my very favorite people in the world and such a wonderful performer. That's the other singer, Tina Haas-Finlay, for anyone who's not familiar. But I kind of had to be like, well, this is where the dancers need it to be, so we're gonna do that, and that can get interesting when you've got musicians and Serkan on the other end. But again, people of such goodwill and very colorful personalities, but ultimately it all worked out just fine.
The ballet this season, everyone's season of the arts were shifted or changed or pivoted. So I don't want to dwell on that necessarily, because we're on to bigger and better, more resilient times. But I did want to touch on that word resilience. And that was the theme that the ballet adopted throughout this past season. I was wondering if you could share any thoughts you have on what being resilient means to you personally during this time in the arts, as a singer, a musician, a dad, any way you want to sort of describe that for us.
Well, it cannot be overstated what a long haul this past year has been in the arts community. And it's kind of, I mean, it mirrors society at large. I think no matter how fortunate anyone has been through all of it, it's impacted everyone in some way. And if you would have told me at Noche back mid-March when we had to adjust everything, that we would still be here after a year of having to do that, I think that would have been hard to believe. But the thing about the resilience of I'm going to speak to specifically our arts community in Central Iowa, is that you don't know exactly what you can do until you have to do it. What else was there to do? It's a very the show must go on kind of moment. And it was a high compliment to be reached out to again by the ballet to pivot and do this way. But I think that there was that kind of shared feeling of just trying to persist and get through it all together. But it does make me very proud of our arts community for sure.
When you think about choosing different organizations to collaborate with, do you generally, is there a lead in that conversation, or do you feel the best organizations sort of someone as the aha, and then they work together to bring it to life? What has your process been?
I mean, it's always great when there's an organic spark of inspiration, and then the ambition from all parties involved to, capitalize on that, which is, I think, what happened in this case. There were some natural connections back over a year ago when we did the first event, but then taking the initiative to make other projects happen is that's a compliment to the administrative people involved, for sure. I think that in running my own small organization, there always has to be different levels at which you're planning things. Hopefully there always is enough room for more spur of the moment kind of innovative programming that comes about organically, while also building out the larger structure for all of your programming. So I don't know if that answered the question.
That did answer the question. I had mentioned in the chat during the performance that Logan and Amelia, who were bubbling together was the professional term, since March, when we were really having to make a lot of changes. In April, Iowa Public Radio was doing a Tunes Day. There's a hashtag in there somewhere. And I remember at the ballet trying to figure out, is this safe? How do we do this? How do we protect Max and his band and the dancers? And it was such a, that was April. So almost 1 year ago that we watched that unfold. And I still remember the feeling looking at my little screen at the dinner table thinking, what does this world come to? But I wanted to just share that to acknowledge what a great collaborator you've been in terms of really caring for the dancers and finding ways to continue to bring the arts to our audiences, which I really appreciate.
Well, thank you. And truly, I mean it when I say it has been my pleasure. It's been a very fun experience, and I hope there's plenty more to come.
Well, we won't let the jazz cat out of the bag, but we are certainly hopeful that talks are maybe currently happening to see what will happen this spring or summer. So stay tuned for that. We're going to switch now to our last performance of the evening, Sliding Figures. Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you.